And I imagine we will get a feed of Zelensky there in Utah, so we'll make sure to bring it to you right here on Live Now from Fox. Do want to get to some developing news that we are following right now out of the Middle East. Israel saying that the Hamas terror group has again fired rockets at the Kerem Shalom crossing, which is used, of course, to transfer humanitarian aid. On social media, Israel saying, quote, Hamas will find any way to prevent humanitarian aid from reaching the people of Gaza. Now, this has happened several times over the last several weeks. To talk more about this and the other developments, and there are quite a few of them, I do want to bring in Professor Simon Mabon, specializing in Middle East security at Lancaster University. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, first off, I do want to talk about this developing news right now, as Israel is saying that those rockets were fired there at the Kerem Shalom crossing. That is a fairly big deal, considering that is used to bring humanitarian aid into Gaza. So what do you make of that?
Yeah, it is a big deal, and it's a worrying development, given that that is where a large percentage of the aid, the humanitarian aid that is going into Gaza is getting in. So it's a worry, of course, but I think it's also emblematic of the ongoing failure and inability to reach a ceasefire on all sides. This inability to bring an end to the fighting is ultimately having the deepest impact on the people of Gaza, who are unable to get access to this aid by virtue of the fighting that continues and the lack of the necessary materials needed to rebuild after everything that's been happening.
Yeah, and again, that is the post coming in from Israel there. It does show a map, but it says just about an hour ago, Hamas fired rockets at the Kerem Shalom crossing used to transfer humanitarian aid. Now, I do want to talk a little bit more about the war itself here, because the first part of the IDF's internal probe of the October 7th attack does reveal that nearly 350 Hamas terrorists apparently infiltrated that one kibbutz there over in southern Israel due to serious errors by the IDF. There's a lot to that probe, and again, it is focusing on just one kibbutz. So what do you make of those findings? Anything surprising there?
Not particularly surprising. I think it's a good thing that these probes are happening. Of course, they happen in any instance like this, or where military and security organizations are self-reflexive. They take stock of what has happened and why, and trying to understand it to prevent such things from happening again. So in terms of the context of the probe itself, I mean, it's a pretty devastating part of a truly horrific set of attacks, with 350 Hamas fighters crossing in, 101 killed, 32 hostages, 11 of whom still remain in Gaza. So the devastation caused there is huge, and that obviously necessitates this type of response, this type of self-reflection. But the thing that worries me slightly, and the thing that surprises me, is that there is an apparent inability, and this is a quote here, to assess how it happened. And that was from the former head of the National Security Council. So that suggests that there is a need to go far deeper into this. And it points to some pretty worrying security, intelligence, and military failings that obviously need to be addressed and looked upon in far more detail.
Does that mean that a full statewide, so to speak, investigation will be conducted? Because what we're talking about, of course, is this IDF specific to a kibbutz probe that went underway. Yep. But will there be a statewide one that takes place?
I think it's almost inevitable that that type of thing will take place. We know that Israel, the IDF, the Mossad, and various other branches have cultivated a great sense of pride by virtue of their professionalism in the way that they approach intelligence. And yet this is a catastrophic intelligence failure. There is no doubt of that, given the severity of the loss of life here. So much like what happened after 9/11, the attacks of 9/11, there will be a process of self-reflection, of institutional reflection, of looking at what happened and why. And this needs to be holistic. And there are calls from people in Israel for it to be holistic from the very, very top to the very, very bottom, not just the specific reflections on a particular part of October 7, as this probe has looked at, but across the board. So I think that's inevitable.
And should we expect, I guess, more of those IDF probes and really the reports to be released in, let's say, the coming weeks?
I couldn't comment on the exact timelines, but I would imagine that given that one has come out, we will start to see the others sort of drip feeding down in the coming weeks. Of course, there is a political dimension to this, given that this will, of course, not reflect well on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. So there is, I guess, a question of whether this will be timed at a particular political moment. So that has to be taken into consideration. But the probes and the wider investigation will be damning for those in positions of power and in serious sort of intelligence and security positions.
President Biden was speaking at the NATO summit, and he did say essentially that Israel and Hamas have agreed on the quote-unquote framework for a ceasefire hostage release deal. We've been hearing about that for a while. So my question for you, are we any closer to that deal actually being reached right now than we were, let's say, weeks, even months ago?
So your opening question, Joshua, is about the rockets that had been fired on one of the border crossings. And I think that was your opening question, tells us a lot about how close we are. The rockets are still being fired. The people of Gaza are still suffering. The people of Israel still live in fear. We do not appear to be any closer to getting a resolution to this, despite the broad terms being agreed. I think we all know broadly what the short-term points of these agreements are, but getting it finalized, getting it over the line with the Israeli leadership and the Hamas leadership, I think is going to be a very difficult thing for now, unless there is serious external pressure on all parties to make this deal happen. And it has to happen. This is not just affecting the lives of people in Gaza and Israel, but it's also starting to sort of resonate across the wider Middle East as well.
And I am going to take you out to this live image that we do have right here showing the Israel-Gaza border as we talk a little bit more about the developments there. We heard from Turkey's president, who spoke at the NATO summit as well, saying that NATO cannot be allowed to continue its partnership with Israel and, quote, attempts at cooperation with Israel within NATO will not be approved by Turkey. Is that fairly significant, or is that essentially what we've been hearing all along?
It's emblematic, I think, of Turkey's position in NATO, in the sense that some have described it as a bit of a rogue state, some have described it as a bit of an outlier. It seems to be walking this delicate line between being a member of NATO and being an ally of the US and criticizing the US, criticizing Russia and selling arms to Russia, selling drone parts to Iran, and then opening up drones factories in the Ukraine, and then criticizing Israel, whilst seemingly, according to some reports, having back-channel dealings with Israel. And now, with everything that's been said, accusing the US of being complicit in, quote, Israeli war crimes. So Turkey is walking in a very sort of complex manner here. It seems to be walking a delicate balancing act between being a firm member and ally of NATO, but squeezing NATO for whatever it can get, as we saw with regard to Sweden. There was a call for Sweden to join NATO. Turkey vetoed it at first until it was able to get the US to agree to the sale of F-16s. So it's trying to capitalize on the situation for its own ends. And I think that is perhaps the broader pattern of Turkish engagement with NATO.
I want to talk a little bit more about what's going on in the north. Take a live look here. This is over at the Israel-Lebanon border. Have we seen any kind of slowdown in the attacks by Hezbollah in Lebanon over at northern Israel? Because I know just days ago we had 2 civilians that were killed by rocket fire, essentially coming in from Hezbollah into Israel. Then you also have other injuries. There's property damage. Thankfully, some of the rockets are falling there into places where people are not living. So my question for you, is there any end in sight to this?
Well, this goes back to what I was saying about Gaza and the need for a ceasefire agreement there, because the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, suggested the other day that if there was a ceasefire in Gaza, then Hezbollah would also cease its attacks on Israel. Now, whether that's true or not, it's difficult to say, but I think we can certainly say that the ceasefire in Gaza is an imperative next step. That is absolutely essential. Ending the humanitarian suffering, ending the fear that people have of future attacks in Israel. I think that's absolutely imperative. So that's one. But then in terms of what's happening right now, there is this low intensity conflict, this low level set of skirmishes between Israel and Hezbollah that, without wanting to be too crude about it, is actually serving the interests of the Israeli leadership and indeed the leadership of Hezbollah, which seems incredibly crass of me to say, given that people are losing their lives and losing their livelihoods here. But the Israeli leadership is able to use it for its own political ends, and Hezbollah's leadership is able to use it for its own political ends. So keeping it at that low intensity level conflict, I think, is obviously of paramount importance. But what we're seeing is that it's remaining under that threshold. And what I think is interesting as well, we're seeing different types of tactics being used. Of course, the Israelis are using high-tech approaches to intelligence gathering and security and monitoring. But Hezbollah has gone analog, if you will. It's taken an analog approach to a digital world to try and circumvent the Israeli observations and the Israeli intelligence gathering processes. So you've got this complex set of tensions and processes and interactions that are remaining at a low intensity for now. Now, of course, the danger here is that it could easily escalate if one side misreads the other. And this is classic game theory and prisoner's dilemma and the sort of stuff that political scientists do all the time. That's the worry, that things could very easily escalate out of control, despite neither side necessarily wanting it to go beyond where it's currently at.
All right, Simon Mabon, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I know we kind of jumped around to a lot of different topics there, so I appreciate you helping to break it down. Anything you want to add about anything going on there in the Middle East before I let you go?
No, I think you've covered a wide range of topics there, as always. Thank you for giving me the time. I think it's just, again, important to stress that people's lives are at stake here, people's livelihoods. We need to get some diplomatic resolutions to what's going on in Gaza, and we need to make sure that the Israeli-Hezbollah tensions remain low level or indeed not at all. But that will require diplomacy. That will require a diplomatic resolution in the longer term. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you again for being here. We appreciate it.
Thanks.